efforts a herd owner must take to minimize the risk of brucellosis spreading from an affected herd while that herd is under quarantine and an affected herd management plan. So if you have a reactor herd, the producer is required by the USDA to enter into an affected herd management plan, which is the process by which that quarantine can be released. It's generally a series of 3 whole herd tests, 60 days apart, 1 after calving. That can be altered depending on the circumstances, but that would be a typical affected herd management plan. So that's criteria 1 that a producer must take. The second would be a qualified expense, is an expense that a herd owner incurs while that herd is under quarantine and would not otherwise be incurred during his normal herd management. So if it's in his typical business model to buy X amount of hay and he buys X amount of hay, again, that is not a qualified expense. But if he has to buy more feed because he can no longer pasture this herd with an unquarantined herd that he may own, that can be deemed a qualified expense. Those are offered up to the state veterinarian and myself for review. A list of those qualified expenses that they're applying for, we can affirm, confirm, or deny any on that list. If we deny some and the producer wants to take a hearing, that will then go before my board to determine that. So that's where that is. That has a limit on it of $25,000 to any one producer upon any one quarantine. So if a producer, typically it takes about a year. By herd work, we usually find these suspect or reactors in fall herd work when cattle are bled to leave the DSA. Could take a full year before that testing protocol runs out, at least 6 months to get you to that after calving. So this is designed in that 25,000. That's probably going to be that one quarantine. There's been occasions where producers can't test negative through those 3 tests. If you test your first test, you have another reactor or suspect, that test doesn't count. You now start the clock on another 3 tests. So it can extend. We've had producers in the past that's taken them a couple years to get out from under. So that's what the in brucellosis mitigation reimbursement is, $25,000 to offset those expenses, which could be feed, could be rent of extra pasture, could be transportation cost on moving those cattle. That's the 30,000 foot view of that split in those indemnity programs. Again, as I mentioned Tuesday, there's $100,000 floor in that account that below, if the account goes to that level, we won't fund any more reimbursement for mitigation. It would only be the original indemnity until such time as we came to the governor for a B11 or to the legislature for a reload of that funding. And just one more thing on the funding, that, as I'd said the other day, that was established in 2011 as a one-time non-revertible interest carrying account that carries forward. It was $500,000. We're still at about $560,000. So that account is managed and held its own in the intervening dozen years. We've only got had one claim for a mitigation claim, and it was not at the full level. So I think we're solid as far as funding that, but that's the split in the indemnities. There's the 2 different types, one which has a cap. Worst case scenario, the disposal indemnity cannot have a cap, particularly pointed at one group of producers. Because if Senator Kolb was to, and I'm not going to give anybody any bad luck, but you're on that end, so I'll start with you. If Senator Kolb was to have 10, we're going to indemnify all 10 of the reactors, and we would do that regardless of that cost until that fund was depleted and we came and asked for a B11 or a reload. So that's required through the UMNR, through the brucellosis rules of the USDA. So if there's any questions, or if I really muddied the waters, Madam Chairman, I'd be happy to try and clean that up.
It's clear as mud. Thank you, Director. No, it was really good. It's good for us to know how that program works, that there are sideboards on it when it was put in place, and that you have good control over the finances and the processes. So thank you for that. I think Senator French had a question.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. I've had a frog all day. Senator Ellis, possibly. tribes not have the reservation not have a reservation veterinarian that would handle all these issues, whether it's brucellosis in a cow herd or bison or whatever?
Madam Chair, Senator French, I think there might be someone in the audience who could better answer that question. I would add, Chairman Steinmetz and I had a discussion, though. Tribes are really hamstrung in how they can raise revenue. Like, although they have the sovereignty of states, a lot of their property is tax exempt because it's actually federally owned and held in trust for the management, or they hold that for the tribes. So, the traditional fundraising mechanism of property tax, those kind of things aren't necessarily available. So I would defer, though, if someone else in the audience has an answer specific to your question. But that is one reason that we should be very thoughtful in what kind of support and partnerships we have with our tribes, is to provide that kind of support that mutually benefits the state of Wyoming and the reservation.
And while you're coming forward, did you have something to add, Travis, or? Go ahead, but while you're coming forward too, I think that it's important for us to recognize that our brucellosis status affects the entire state. So the testing on the reservation is not segregated as the reservation, it would be the whole state of Wyoming. And so I think it's appropriate for our Wyoming state veterinarian to be working on these issues within, all areas of the state. But do you want to let Travis visit?
Follow
first?
up real
Yeah,
quick.
go ahead.
But if they had the reservation, their own veterinarian that handled it, they might catch it before we did.
That's a great point. Travis, did you have Mr. McNiven? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Senator French, to my knowledge, there is not a reservation or tribal veterinarian. There is a joint game warden for the fish and game, of course, that does all of that. The tribal producers and non-tribal producers on the reservation, many of them that I know, they use all of the Fremont County vets, the private practice vets in the county that come out and do all of the various vet work. And for a long time, a former state vet, Jim Logan, of course, had his office was in Riverton, and so there was always a lot of discussion and such.
All right. Does that satisfy you? Okay. Anyone else? Senator Ide?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned one incident. Can you expound on that a little bit? When was that, and was it in buffalo or cattle or and how many other ones? Just a little bit of a timeline and maybe how much of it you've seen out there. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Senator Ide, you're referring to my comment on the person that couldn't get out of quarantine? Is that the
I
one?
guess that's what you were referring to.
It can happen. It was in the designated surveillance area and in cattle. The person it came up with another reactor, never a group, but just another animal, which is, if Dr. Hazel's here, she could explain the science to you. But that's why we have the after calving test. There are certain hormones and sugars released in the inside the animal at that time that the brucellosis bacteria loves. And an animal that may be latent, that may is not testing, might produce at that time in that after calving test. So that's when that can happen particularly.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, well, thank you guys so much. And I think we're ready to work the bill now, since we had closed public testimony in our previous session. So committee, what is your pleasure on the bill? Moved by Cole,
Second.
seconded by Ide. Is there any, are there any amendments to the bill? Any amendments to the bill? Senator Cole, would you turn on your microphone?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I'll start off on page 2, line 15. Delete, comma, both.
Say that again, would you mind?
Page 2, line 15. Delete, comma, both.
All right, we've got that.
And I'll proceed, Madam Chair.
Yes, go right ahead.
Page 2, line 16, delete tribes or A, and insert or the, after body, insert testing, containment, and reimbursement services provided under this section shall apply only to domestic bison.
Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Moved by Kolb, seconded by Ide. Discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Are there any further amendments to the bill? Seeing none, is there any further discussion on the bill?
Quick.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought it was a good question that Senator French brought up about a state veterinarian or a tribal veterinarian there. And I understand Senator Ellis brought up a good comment that where it is, it's held in trust lands and the taxes are an issue. It's probably, I don't know if they get PILT payments like the rest of the counties on, BLM land and that sort of thing, but I can see that as being an issue to try to fund stuff like that. So that's the only comment I had on the discussion.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you so much. All right. We'll close discussion, and Linda, if you would call the roll, please.
No.
Aye.
Oh, she
Oh.
was on Hicks.
Oh,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go right ahead. Uh,
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The bill has passed and will now move to the committee of the whole. Thank you very much. All right. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 87, Natural Resources Funding. Yes, go. Who would like to present on the floor? Anyone?
Go ahead.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for the reminder, Linda. All right, welcome Senator Cooper and Director Bud. Go right ahead and give us the lowdown on your good little bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For the record, my name is Ed Cooper, Senator Ed Cooper. I'm here today representing the Select Natural Resource Funding Committee. And could give you a little genesis. I'm sorry, this is Director Bud of the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust Fund. Excuse me. And I'm here today to tell you the genesis of this bill was in the Natural Resource Funding Committee this last meeting, and we felt that we needed to bump the threshold for their discretionary spending in their small projects. But we figured out that we didn't have the authority to do that from the committee. We had to bring it in front of the entire legislature. So I got nominated to bring this to you. So that's the genesis of it. Just a little bit of information about the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust and the trust fund. They manage, I believe it's about a $200 million trust fund. And the funds that you're going to see come out of there that we're authorizing come from the earnings of that trust fund. Okay, it's not state money. It's not. It's nothing out of the general fund. This is strictly from the earnings of the trust. So, with that said, the way the original trust was set up back in 2005, they added a threshold for discretionary spending, their smaller projects, of $200,000. Anything above that had to have legislative approval for them to spend. There's been a little inflation since 2005. And what we're seeing right now is that a lot of these small projects fall above that. In this year's natural resource funding bill, there was 4 of the 9 projects that just bumped out of the $200,000 range that would fall into this range. So our ask today, as we go through the bill, is pretty simple. We would like to raise the threshold for the small project spending from $200,000 to $400,000. That they would be able to invest in these projects prior to having to come out for additional legislative approval. With that said, also on page 2 of the bill, on line 21, I believe it is, we have what I consider to be an error there. The increase on the additional spending form for additional grants for large projects that were initiated before that needed to be cleaned up. We have $200,000 on the bill. I'd like to, if you would, consider an amendment to bump that up to $400,000. Some things that we need to think about here. This group is probably they've been in business since 2005, and Lord only knows how many millions and millions of dollars they've invested in the state of Wyoming. But it's really well deserved money. They take their earnings and they leverage it with grants, with donations, on all kinds of funding, and their average leverage is about 6 to 1. So for every $1 million that they spend, they put $6 million back into the Wyoming economy. It's a big deal. These projects are all wildlife or habitat or fisheries or, I'm sorry. Yeah, ag irrigation projects. Some really great projects, and it's from one end of the state to the other. So it's really good stuff. With that said, I'll probably turn this over to Mr. Budd for a minute and let him expound on what I have to say.
Thank you, Senator Cooper. Go
Thank you,
ahead.
Madam Chairman. Bob Budd, Director of the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust. And I don't have a lot to add to what Senator Cooper told you. We ran across this. We do a tour every summer with the Select Committee and go out and look at projects that have been done and projects that are proposed. This year we did that in the Bighorn Basin and looked at a number of river projects, fish passage and irrigation infrastructure projects that all would have exceeded the $200,000. In addition to that, we're looking at invasive species as one of the biggest challenges this state has in front of us. And the cost of Rejuvra, which is the chemical of choice that Senator French, we talked about last year, is considerably higher than what we used to do. So you can be at $200,000 on a cheatgrass control project almost instantaneously. The issue with raising the cap is that if we don't do that, it bumps us a year out. And so if we can initiate projects the way and have that cap bump up, we can actually do these projects in the same time that they come in. If not, waiting for legislative approval on those smaller ones, it costs a year. And you can imagine what that year can mean if it's cheatgrass, or if it's Vent Nata or Medusa Head, or even if it's a river project where you've got damage happening to a river that you can correct. Those are the kind of things that we're trying to address. I don't think it's an unrealistic number to bump up. We haven't done an adjustment in 18 years. The good chair of appropriations in the House pointed that out and said, maybe we ought to think about these things a little more often. And probably that goes to me and my board. We should have done that. But I think it's timely, and I think that it addresses an issue that we have. Just as an example, Madam Chair, you're familiar with the large project bill, and normally we have 3 or 4 or 5 projects. This year we have 9. In our second application period, over half of the applications hit that threshold. So I think it's just a good management approach, and that's what we're trying to do, is continue the work that we've done. Doesn't change that. It just gives the board the latitude to get it done sooner and get work done on the ground. So I appreciate the opportunity, Madam
All
Chairman.
right, thank you so much. Questions from the committee? Okay, Senator French had his hand up first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to clarify on this, on page 2, up there, line 2 through 5, it's requesting a change from 200,000 to 400,000 on the large project. And down towards the bottom of page 2, starting on 15, but I'll read from 17. Following the initial legislative authorization to expend funds for a large project, the board may approve additional grants for that large project, not to exceed a total of an additional, and you're asking that 200 to be 400,000. So if we amend that 200,000 to 400,000, that large project, can it get 800,000? Is that how I'm reading that, or am I reading this wrong?
Madam Chair, with a little latitude, let me give you the history of that. The original law did not contemplate projects that went on for a period of time, like the Wyoming Range project, which we've probably got $2.5 million in, projects, the Goshen, the river, the North Platte and Goshen County, where we did it in stages because we had to deal with the capability of the Weed and Pest District to do X amount, those kind of things. So we came back and identified that and said we need to be able to do project number 1, if it's 200,000, then you'd have another 200,000 to get to where you'd come back. So you're doing the same thing twice. The legislature at that time, for reasons I still don't understand, cut that in half and said, okay, the first time you can go up to 200,000, but after that you can only go to 100, which I would lay out. I don't think that makes sense. If you're doing 400 the first time, that would be approved by the legislature. You'd have the latitude to go to another to 799, but if you went to 800, you'd come back and approve the second 400. So you couldn't do 800 without legislative approval. 400 would be the mark. Does that help?
Go ahead.
Follow up, Madam Chairman. So you're talking maybe a multi-year project, but under this scenario, it could be, if we change it from 200,000 to 400,000, it could potentially over multi-year, a couple years, be up to 800,000.
Madam Chair, that is correct, Senator
Okay,
French.
thank you.
Thank you for that. All right, Senator Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I'll start off with the same line of questions I guess you just had heard. So I don't like the way this is worded. I mean, if we're going to talk about you getting authorization for $800,000, then that's what it is. And I'm really saying that for transparency to the public. So they don't have to read this language and go, well, what's that mean? I add this and this. So I think if you're really wanting $800,000 for a project, then I suppose we could ask for that. And then the other part of this is you could reapply. I mean, if you had a cap, say it's 600,000, say it would go with the same ratio that's in here currently, maximum. Wouldn't you just cap your project at that amount? And then I guess when it goes into the next year, could you then reauthorize another project for doing the same thing to handle the next section of it? I'm just trying to understand this. And then I have one more question. How much money is in this fund we're talking about, and how is the money replenished in the fund that you're using for these expenditures? Could you help me out with that?
So, Madam Chair, I'm going to go in reverse order. The amount of money in the corpus is right at 190 million now. That generates, depending on what the yield is, somewhere around $8 million a year. That money then goes into what is called the income account, which is what our projects are funded out of. And that's the money that the board has to allocate. So the amount that is in the income account today that is not encumbered or committed is about 18 million. Some of that has been proposed to put back into the trust. The reason for that is that we do not have a reserve account, so we manage that cash account to hold a reserve for years where our yields are less. So it's just a matter of how we've chosen to manage it so that you're not spending yourself to zero every year, because as you know, with investments, 1 year you could spend yourself to zero and spend 10 million, and the next you'd earn 2, and your partners have an expectation, and all of a sudden you're just yo-yoing around. So it's to level that out. To the first question, I'm not sure, Senator Kolb, I'm not sure that we're on the same page. There is legislative approval for every 400,000 that's spent. The question you asked that I think is really an important question is, could the board go in and say, this is Wyoming Range Phase 1, call that an independent project, fund it at 395,000, then the next year fund Wyoming Range Phase 2. We have, from day one, said we will not do that, and we have never done that. We ask the proponents to come in and give us their full picture of what that project is going to cost. We just looked at one this year that's probably going to be in the $6 to $8 million range. The board does not allocate $6 to $8 million because we don't want to bind our future boards. So we looked at that current time period and said, what will it take to get this done in the next year or two, depending on where it's at relative to that cap? They would allocate that money, and then that would be what they would work off of. Then we would come back again for additional authorization. There was a temptation early on, and you could see it with different groups that would apply, to come in and say, I'll change the name of this project from Steinmetz Meadows to French Meadows, and it's not the same thing. We don't allow it. It absolutely, that would be, in my opinion, that would be disingenuous to the legislature, and we've enjoyed a great partnership that we don't want to do that with. So that's the protection that's there.
All right. Follow up?
Well, clear as mud for a person that just heard it for the first time. So if we had a scenario where you had a project that would actually cost, say, $800,000, as previously stated, you could do that without legislative approval. But it'd have to be under $799.99. So if I had a project that exceeded it was under $400,000, does that need legislative approval?
Madam Chair, Senator Kolb, no. If it was under 400, it would not. The second phase, if it was $5 and it went over 400, it would. The minute it crosses that threshold, it takes legislative approval.
Well, then what is this second part on K for then?
Madam Chair, Senator Kolb, it's because when the question was left open as to, well, if you approve a large project at 400, let's say, then did you just approve it forever to whatever level it went? And the answer there clearly should be no. But at the same time, if you trust the board to spend the first 400 on a long-term project, you shouldn't have to come back and approve every 100,000 after that incrementally. So that's the logic. If you took the second piece out and just said it's $400,000 anytime it crosses each 400, that's all we're trying to do. If the language is confusing, I'd be happy to look at language to amend it to make it clear.
Okay. Are you satisfied, Senator Kolb?
With a future change, yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Quick question.
Okay, Senator Ide, we'll go to you next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bob Budd, question for you and Senator Cooper. So I'm new here, don't quite understand how the process works when you say you come to the legislature and ask for that original $400,000. Walk me through that, if you would. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Senator Ide, each year we have a bill that the Select Funding Committee, that's that we work with to present a bill to the legislature for any project that is over that threshold. This year there are 9 in there. We had that in committee, in travel committee this morning. It will get re-referred to appropriations. They'll look at it, and then it goes to the floor of both the Senate and the House. That's the check and balance that was put in there in 05. It's very similar to what Water Development Commission does. It was modeled after that. So that's the process that we follow. It's been pretty seamless. I think that there are a number of checks. The board has 3 different reviews of all the projects, including one in the field. We have the Select Committee look at all of them as well. that bill is the end result of that, and then that's brought to the full legislature.
That's right. Thank you, Director Bud. I was going to mention that as well. And I think maybe our small water projects was a little bit built after some of your projects.
Right.
And so we kind of go back and forth. So further questions?
Madam Chair.
French?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
A couple little things I'd like to mention here. First of all, this is probably the smallest department in the state of Wyoming. Everything that's happening within this group happens with Director Bud and one employee. And I think that's a big thing. That speaks highly of his dedication and where this thing is going. To Senator Ide, I'd hoped that we were going to be able to get our large project funding bill in front of you today. It didn't happen, so that you would have a better understanding of what we're looking for here. But you'll see both these bills come forward in the next few days, and maybe get a little clearer for you. Thank you.
Okay, Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A couple things. Well, this bill is asking for a change on large projects from 200,000 to 400,000, correct? Yes. And down below, 100,000 to 200,000 additional. And I believe it was Senator Cooper, you asked or commented that should probably be 400,000. So anyway, my other question is, with a fund of $195 million, you stated in your reserves you have about 18 million or a little over, which is close to 10%. Did the board, how did that number come up? Did it say, well, let's have 10% in reserves at all times? Or how did that come about?
Madam Chair, Senator French, that number is a result of the variability in earnings. And so it's partly the board and I every year look at what we expect the demand to be based on history. It's very stable across the board. It's usually $8 to $10 million, $8 to $12 million a year in requests. How much money do they have to manage that? And if you'll recall, during COVID, two things happened. One is we had less projects, and the other is returns went up. So it bumped it up. The board will spend off of that, and then we'll hit periods like we are now where we're spending considerable amounts on cheatgrass, as an example. Millions of dollars all over the state on cheatgrass. That'll deplete that 18 back down. We deliberately manage to keep enough in there that if we have a down market, that we can actually float through that in the next year, so that you're not spending, as some of these types of programs do, they spend everything they have and then they hope they get more. We're trying to, we continue to provide a service. We have people out in the state, many of them, whose employment depends on the work that we are funding. And so if you're putting them on a yo-yo and saying, yeah, 1 year it's here and the next year it's there, that doesn't work. So that is a cognizant decision of myself and my board to maintain a steady amount of funding available throughout the years.
All right. All right, let's kind of get back on just the narrower subject of the bill so that we don't keep everybody too late here tonight. Are there any other questions as we go? Senator Kolb.
Yeah, no, thank you, Madam Chairman. I really do well with mathematical formulas. So maybe I can take another stab at this. You can tell me if I'm reading this right. If there's legislative approval for an appropriation that exceeds $400,000, right, in this scenario we're laying out, then you're wanting to authorize another $400,000 for a project if there's legislative authorization. Am I reading that right?
Madam Chair, yes, you are, Senator Kolb. And it might be easier, and I don't mean to take this too long, but it might be easier to understand this in the sense that we'll get a project. A good example would be cheatgrass in Sublette County. Came in, their initial that we funded was $800,000. Okay, that hit the threshold and that was funded. We knew the next year that would probably be 400 more. So that came back. And if you do it at $100,000 increments after your first one, you can't effectively manage a lot of these systems, particularly if you look at things like big river systems, if you look at invasive species. So that's all that is that every time you'd hit 400 or more, it has to come back to the legislature. Does that make sense, sir?
Well, does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Well, I'm going to take a little bit of liberty to weigh in here just a minute, since I served on TRW for several years in the House and have seen this come through. And this is a really well-managed agency, just like water development. They manage their fund well. They're frugal with what they do. They really provide a service to the state of Wyoming. And so I just wanted to weigh in with that a little bit. We're not talking about someone who's picking money off a tree in a backyard. They really are frugal and they do a good job. So with that, are there any further questions before we go forward? All right, we will let you guys go then. Thank you for presenting, and we'll see if there's any public testimony on this bill here today.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, yes. Mr. Magagna, please come up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Jim McGaggan with the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association. Just very briefly, we have been strong proponents of this program. We're very involved in creating the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. And I look back on the ways that it has supported the ranching industry in the state of Wyoming in so many ways. An obvious one is conservation easements. We have family ranches that are continuing to operate today, 5 and 6 generations, that would not be operating if they hadn't been able to receive the funding from a conservation easement. Resource enhancements, Mr. Budd mentioned cheatgrass and bentonada and Medusa head. Those provide direct benefits to the ranching community as well. So we think that the dollars spent, that this is one of the programs that the state has that provides the strongest benefit to our ranching community in Wyoming. We've seen how the cost of all of these things has increased in recent years, and would strongly support that the increase from 200,000 to 400,000 in order to be timely in how you react and respond to these different types of conditions that occur on the range, because nature doesn't wait for the legislature to meet. So with that, we would encourage your support of this bill and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Magagna. Any questions for Mr. Magagna? Seeing none, thank you very
Thank you.
much. All right. Any further public comments?
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, this is Kelly Little with the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. WACD supports this bill. The Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust has been a great partner to conservation districts. There are actually 2 conservation district sponsored projects on the funding bill this year that you will see when it comes to the floor. And we just appreciate the flexibility that this bill provides to the trust to complete those important conservation projects. And with that, I'll sit for questions.
Any questions? Seeing none?
Thank
I'll
you.
let you go. Thank you. All right. Any further public comment? We have one person on Zoom. Go ahead and admit them, Pierre. Thank you for that. And do we have a name? Josh Metton. Welcome, Josh. Can you hear us?
Yes. Hello, Madam Chair, Chairwoman and the board. My name is Josh Metton with the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. On and for the bill. I'm calling from Cody, Wyoming, where I live. Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership's mission is to guarantee all Americans quality places to hunt and fish. We work here in Wyoming on that. We're strong supporters of the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust. It's truly a Wyoming solution to funding critical habitat projects across the state. The strong board and legislative oversight of WWNRT is a great reason why increasing the funding cap will be quite successful. We also support increasing the funding cap as a simple fix to reflect, like as Jim McAdam was saying, the increasing costs of some of these projects, inflation, and just the importance of these projects going forward. And as you've heard, this has broad coalition support. So we urge you to support the amendment. Thank you. Or the bill, excuse me. Thank you.
Very much. Thanks for your participation tonight. All right. Any further public comment? Seeing none, we will close public comment. And committee, what is your pleasure on the bill? Moved by Kolb. Seconded by French. Is there any amendments to the bill?
Yes,
Senator
Madam Chair.
Kolb.
Page 2, line 5. Line 4. Replace $200,000 with $400,000.
Okay. Can you restate that, please?
After exceeds, insert $400,000.
On page 2,
Line
line
4.
4.
Yes.
I'll put that back in. Oh, well,
So
that's
you're-
what, he's got $400,000.
Oh, I thought it was amended. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was striking out 200. I'm
Senator
sorry. That's
Kolb, I think that the part Senator Cooper was talking about
was line
amending
22.
is on line 22.
Well,
Would-
I'd make the motion to go to $200,000 on line 22.
So you want to leave it as is?
Yeah,
All right, so,
out of discussion.
okay,
Leave it as is.
all right, so would you like to withdraw your amendment?
I would.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have no amendments on the bill. Calling once, going twice. Yes, Senator Ide.
My question, thank you, Madam Chair. My question, I don't entirely understand how this agency's funded. Haven't been here long enough, haven't studied it. You know, they've got $190 million in there. Are they operating solely off of the earnings from the corpus? Am I understanding that right?
Senator Ide, yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
That
and
answers.
I believe it's invested somewhat similar to the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, and they get the interest and earnings off of that, and that is available for appropriation. These are the smaller projects we're increasing the limits on today, but then the large project funding bill comes through the legislature as a bill, just like the select water bill that we saw, the omnibus water bill. And then we approve those, approve, disapprove, amend, have the ability to do that. The projects are vetted very similar to the water development projects. And so it's just it's another program very similar for conservation and management of cheatgrass, different things like that. They do, waterways, they do a lot of work, and they partner with the Game and Fish and sometimes water development as well, and weed and pest districts and conservation districts across the state. So that's kind of how it works.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So if they came to the legislature and asked for $400,000, it would be coming out of the earnings off of this corpus
Correct.
of this. And it really wouldn't be any further appropriation from the general fund to anything.
No.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
that's right. Yes, that's exactly right. It's a self-sustaining fund,
Okay,
if that helps.
that helps a lot.
Thank you for
Yeah.
the questions. Okay. We're on to discussion on the bill. We've decided not to amend the bill, I'm assuming. Are we done with amendments before we go to discussion? Done with amendments? Okay, on to discussion. Go ahead, Senator French.
I was just going to add, Madam Chairman, that this fund, to Senator Ide, this fund's been building over the years. I believe last year or the year before, we put $75 million into the fund, which brought it up to the 195. So it's been building over a number of years. And
Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification, Senator French. All right. Any more discussion? Go ahead, Senator Cole.
Yeah, I'd like to apologize for me not be able to read the already included amendment and the change of appropriation. But I will say that I'd like to just say that frankly, Senator Cooper's on the bill that he signed off on for the amount of money. And I didn't, I guess I should have asked the question, but I didn't hear why that really changed from when this bill was drafted. So I'm a little confused on what the true, why that changed. That's my only
Senator- Yeah, thank you, Senator Kolb. I think he thought it was an oversight on his part. And so we'll allow him to bring an amendment from the floor since the committee has chosen not to. With that, Linda, would you please take the roll call vote?
Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Hicks has submitted an absentee vote of aye. Senator Ide.
Aye.
Senator Kolb.
Aye.
Chairman Steinmetz.
Aye.
So that is 5 ayes, no noes.
All right, the bill has passed. Thank you, Senator Cooper and Director Bud. We appreciate you being here tonight. All right. Who would like to? Senator French will present this bill on the floor. Thank you, Linda. All right. The next bill for our consideration is the one it looks like many people in the room have been waiting for. Senate File 102, the Food Freedom Act Amendment. Senator Salazar, and I hear you have brought a friend.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to bring up former Representative Tyler Lindholm, who, as everyone knows, is the father of the Food Freedom Act and is truly the expert in one of the most popular pieces of state legislation that I've seen since I've been here. So thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
I also want to recognize Representative Shelley Duncan, who's who has worked also extensively on the Food Freedom Act. So, so Madam Chair, with your indulgence?
Yes, go right ahead. Please
so,
state your name and then we'll go ahead.
Yes, Madam Chair, my name is Senator Tim Salazar. I represent Senate District 26, and I'm bringing the Food Freedom Act amendments. Just by way of a little background, Madam Chair, the Wyoming Food Freedom Act was originally adopted in 2015, and it was really setting a new standard for marketing homemade foods. This is not a big bill. It's actually a relatively short bill. What we have found was there was some feeling that there might have been some ambiguities that we're just simply trying to clear up to continue to allow local producers to produce what they have been doing. Specifically to this bill, Madam Chair, we're dealing with dairy products, eggs and dairy products. On page 1, line 1, an act relating to marketing homemade foods, specifically that any person may sell eggs or dairy products pursuant to the Wyoming Food Freedom Act. If you look at page 2, Madam Chair, we also put into this bill the definitions of what a designated agent is, which I think had some ambiguity. And let me just read this. A designated agent means a person employed by the producer to facilitate sales transactions, including marketing, transport, storage, and delivery of food or drink products. A designated agent shall be named in writing by the producer and shall not take ownership of any food or drink products. And then again on page 2, section C, line 21, line 23, a producer may employ a designated agent to facilitate a transaction, the seller of eggs, dairy products, or a homemade food product consisting of non-potentially hazardous food. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is on page 4, line 14. The producer shall inform the end consumer that any food product or foods sold at a farmer's market or through ranch, farm, or home-based sales pursuant to this act is not certified, labeled, licensed, packaged. So it's really incumbent on the consumer to know what they're purchasing, and that is clear in the bill. And then finally, on page 5, starting on line 10, number M, in addition to the transactions permitted under this act, homemade food producers may sell homemade food and drink products, eggs or dairy products, to the maximum extent permitted by federal law. The Department of Agriculture shall not promulgate any standard for food and health inspection that is applicable to this act that is more stringent than a standard established by the United States Department of Ag. So that is what we're doing specifically in this bill. We're trying to stay within the legislature's intent of the Food Freedom Act that came about, and at the same time give all of our local producers that latitude that makes this Food Freedom Act so great. And if you don't mind, Madam Chair, I'd like to call on Representative Lidholm to maybe add a couple comments, if that's permissible.
Of course.
Okay.
Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Really appreciate the opportunity and members of the Ed Committee. It's really kind of what we've seen, and I know, Madam Chairman, you've been part of this from the word go. And what has happened over time is you get some unintended consequences as the legislation is being drafted. And that's because there's no model legislation out for food freedom. Wyoming is the model. In fact, if you go to Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, for example, they've got a map of every of the United States and which states are best. Wyoming stands alone, well above everyone else, because we have this model legislation. There's really no other state to look at. So what happened over time is there was some unintended consequences where some I can't say the word. Yeah, that was accidentally put in place, and it's been interpreted differently by different inspectors throughout the state. Their job, and I think the Department of Agriculture has done a wonderful job. Their job is to interpret the laws as it is written. And over time, there's been some differences of opinion. And I think what Senator Salazar has here, Madam Chairman and members of the committee, is really straightens that out, that this third-party designated agent is important. And then also on the last page, putting kind of a harder stop in place, saying, don't go blow past anything that you don't have to do. The Department of Agriculture has been fantastic about that in the past. Honestly, I wish we could do this to the DEQ. Maybe I shouldn't say that, Mike. But either way, as an individual, absolutely support what Senator Salazar has. But also putting on another hat, I'm also the state director for Americans for Prosperity, and they definitely support this legislation.
All right, thank you so much. Committee, do you have any questions for the sponsors of the bill? Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, indulge me. Concerns about infectious diseases, brucellosis. What are the safety procedures involved so the public wouldn't be potentially subjected to that? Could you help me with that? I don't have a cow, or I'm not allowed to have eggs in town. So could you, a little clarification with that? And then also, what are the sideboards for us violating or going too far with USDA? I mean, not that that's top on my list, but obviously we have to work with, in those sideboards.
Right.
So we don't, bring the wrath of that upon us, I think. And I don't know if you're the right people to respond to that, but those are my kind of general questions. Thank you.
Madam Chair, one of the great things about having an expert right next to you, which is so rare, is that I'm going to take advantage of that. So,
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I don't know that I'm an expert, but I've been beat up a lot on this issue. So I've learned some things along the way. So when it comes to infection control, this is under 1249 is where the Food Freedom Act lies. And also in that act, it's not specifically in this legislation because it didn't need to be part of it, but part of that act is that if there is any reported foodborne illnesses or anything like that, the Department of Agriculture has every right to inspect and every right to actually chase that down. So those infection control pieces are in place. and I'll put an anecdote on that because when it comes down to raw milk and those types of things, it's kind of the boogeyman as far as foods are concerned. But actually, it couldn't be farther from the truth. The real boogeyman is those things your mother tried to make you eat. It's the leafy greens. That is truly, truly, you can go to the CDC's website and verify this. Your top infection control or foodborne illness carriers in this country are leafy greens. It's spinach, it's sprouts, and those types of things, because they're such a, it's not because they're evil unto themselves, relatively, but it is because they're a perfect place to grow bacteria. They never are frozen or anything like that. And so it's really a great place to grow bacteria. Whereas raw milk still has yet to kill anyone in recorded CDC's history.
All right.
Whereas cookie dough kills multiple people every day. So watch out for cookie dough, Madam Chairman.
Thank you for that.
If I could answer the second portion, Madam Chair, Ed, could you remind me of that, Senator Kolb? I'm sorry.
On cookie dough.
Okay.
Go ahead, Senator Kolb.
Oh, the sideboards, or we're dealing with USDA
Oh.
and then not having them step in.
Right. Madam Chairman and members of the committee, Senator Kolb, when it comes to state primacy, Wyoming's pretty proud of its state primacy, and it has state primacy in multiple different types of facets, from meat and other types of areas. And that's what your local inspectors are going and looking at: grocery stores, custom slaughter facilities, restaurants, all looking for those standards to be maintained. There's a minimum standard that's put into place, ensuring that inspected products meet those requirements, because these are non-inspected products. For the most part, the USDA leaves that up to the state. And most of I don't want to speak for the director for the Department of Agriculture, but most of the Wyoming Food Freedom Act has been drafted under his guidance to ensure that we do not color outside the lines. We don't want to lose that state primacy.
Follow up.
Getting back to the brucellosis, if I had a scenario, or is there some, I need to know, what are the protections? You've got a cow that produces milk. What are the protections in place to protect against brucellosis and the production of milk with that in it? How does that work? Could you help me?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And to Senator Kolb's question, specifically towards the raw milk situation, as far as an infectious disease is reported, that'll go through a hospital type environment, is how the state would find out about that type of situation. That infectious disease would be then reported at that point, and the authorities in regards to the Department of Agriculture and Department of Health would then start their investigation. And at that point, the law does allow the Wyoming Food Freedom Act does give permission to those agencies to track down that product and to handle however it deems fit in those regards. Now, brucellosis, as an example, has much higher has a much higher limit as far as, or maybe a lower limit would be the best way to put that, as far as what's permissible and what's not. The state of Wyoming would shut you down pretty quick as soon as they found out that you were the culprit. And they have the right to do that under the Wyoming Food Freedom Act and other engaging legislation.
All right, Senator Kolb.
I only say this because my brother-in-law got this from, in fact, ingesting raw milk. So, but it wasn't a foreign country. Now, that's why I'm down this questioning. But you still get infected. So you find out you got it. Is there a cure? I mean, maybe it's not an informed question, but is there a cure for getting brucellosis here in the United States that people recover?
Go
Madam
ahead.
Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Madam Chairman and Senator, I have no idea on that, on specifically for brucellosis, if there is a cure and what that treatment looks like. I do know that there are no recorded deaths in the United States for that. Madam Chairman, if I could.
Go ahead.
Also, one of the biggest parts of the Food Freedom Act and why it's seen success and why there's been no major foodborne illness outbreaks since it was passed into law in 2015 and the numerous many other amendments is the fact that you have to tell your customer that this has not been inspected. Nobody's looked at this. It's just between me and you. And so that hurdle is a big hurdle because we're not dealing with the Walmarts of the world or the Costco's of the world. We're dealing with Jenny Farm or something along those lines, which small producers tend to pay a little bit closer attention to their product because they have to.
Thank you for that. And I would just direct your attention to page 4 of the bill, where that disclosure part is contained, I believe, in section E, line 14. The producer shall inform the consumer. So that's where that would be contained, if that helps at all, Senator Kolb.
Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else with a question for the bringers of the bill? Senator Ide had his hand up first, so go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Salazar, I said your name wrong earlier today once, you keep all really straight. Tyler Lindholm, good to see you here today too. Just real quick, I'm always about making a good bill even better. It looks like what you guys are trying to do here today. And I noticed, you know, eggs and is everywhere on here. Eggs and milk, effectively, dairy products. What instigated, you know, doing what you're doing to this bill right here? What promulgated your efforts to make this thing better? Thank you.
Yeah. Madam Chair,
ahead.
Senator, I thank you for that question. So, you know, over the last 6 months, 8 months, there's been a little bit of confusion. I was contacted by some of our local producers who were having a little hard time, perhaps continuing what they had been doing in the past. And so what this bill does is simply clarify so that everyone's on the same sheet of music, both for the local producers and for agencies. And I think both the local producers and the government are going to appreciate the fact that we all understand these small but important changes to the Food Freedom Act. And I will tell you, Senator Ide, that you know, I literally could have filled up the room tonight with so many people who support this, but I think you know, it's just a win for the state. And this bill simply clarifies the intent of the state legislature in 2017 when the Food Freedom Act overwhelmingly passed the state legislature. You know, you look at the co-sponsors on the bill, and it's pretty clear cut that there's pretty widespread support. So, Tyler, you have anything you'd want to say on that?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ide. Senator Hicks.
Madam Chairman, I just want to understand the intent when we go to page 2 and we bring in the definition of a designated agent. So this is what I'd like some clarification on. It means a person employed by the producer to facilitate sales transactions. And then we get back down on the bottom of page 2 that carries over and it brings in the same language, to facilitate a transaction. Facilitating something and actually doing it are two different things. And so is it the intent to facilitate the transaction, to facilitate the transport, to facilitate the storage and the delivery of the food? Or is the intent for the purpose of marketing, for the purpose of transport, storage, and delivery of food? Because English words have definitions and those two do not mean the exact same thing. And so I just want to make sure if we're just trying to facilitate something to happen, or the designated agent's actually going to make that happen. Right now, it's just to facilitate something to happen. And so if I was a lawyer and I wanted to exploit a loophole, I don't think this authorizes the designated agent to actually do that. So I'm just trying to understand the intent. Is it for the designated agent to actually do the marketing, the transport, the storage, and the delivery? Is that what you want to do?
Go ahead, whoever would like to answer that one.
Madam Chairman, if I could.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Senator Hicks, for the question. It's kind of where this comes from, designated agent, and that this actually stems from, it actually comes comes from an original Senate file ran by Senator Dockstader. This was 2017, I believe, where he had a farm in his area, in his district, that wanted to be able to sell products out of a separate location than where they were actually at. It was much more convenient for them to have this designated area where that sale could happen. But then also at that same time, they were also producing food at home, so they couldn't be at the farm stand, or what you might want to call it, all the time, or the farmer's market in this case. So there was people that would either volunteer or be employed as their designated agent to sell that product. And so with this language, that is the intent, Senator Hicks, to your point. That,
Okay,
yeah.
so Madam Chairman, I've got a proposed amendment to make that explicitly clear. That's the intent, that we're not to facilitate, but to actually for the purpose of marketing, transport, storage. That's what I thought the intent was. And again, I'm trying to strengthen the bill and make sure that there's not some exploitable loophole out there between the difference for the primary purpose of what we're trying to get to and somebody that's just trying to facilitate something.
All right,
Madam Chairman, if I could,
go ahead.
thank you, Madam Chairman, and to Senator Hicks. I think that's absolutely spot on, as long as we're ensuring that that does not, for some of these products, enter an inspected area as a retail, i.e. a grocer, for example. You wouldn't want something non-inspected going in there, because then that would violate USDA standards and laws.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I think this is just a really simple amendment.
Okay, all right, we'll get to that when we work the bill. How does that sound? All right, any further questions? Seeing none, we'll open it up for public comment. And I know we've got quite a few, including some on Zoom, which we'll go to Zoom last. We'll go to the people in the room first. Oh, let's have the agency first. Excuse me, Director Miyamoto. I somehow neglected to call you up first, so please come on up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Doug Miyamoto and Justin Latham from the Wyoming Department of Agriculture. Just a couple impacts to the Department of Ag that I wanted to make the committee aware of tonight.
Right.
I wanted to thank Mr. Lindholm and Salazar for bringing this and working with us closely over the years to foster the Food Freedom Act and try to make it workable. This has always been designed to reduce the regulatory burden. You know, that was the design of the Wyoming Food Freedom Act, but it does leave the Department of Ag in an interesting and kind of unique position when it comes to that regulatory burden, because it does have some requirements for the Department of Agriculture as well. And so, you know, in this case, as it relates to dairy specifically, it was one of those items laid out in the original Food Freedom Act that the transaction had to be between the producer and the informed end consumer when it came to potentially hazardous food, milk included, prior to this amendment today. That had to be a direct transaction. And so we have inspectors that are out in the field, and I tell them that, you know, when you go in and you inspect these facilities, if you are carrying out the statute, your interpretation's correct, and that you have documentation of noncompliance, then it's my expectation that you'll act. And so I just want the committee to know this is something that should help the Department of Ag, actually, from our standpoint. And I want to let the committee know that I would rather be here today talking about clearing up the language between the Department of Agriculture and the consuming public than I would be sitting here trying to explain why the Department of Agriculture didn't take action when it was compelled to do so, because that's a bad scenario for us. And so I just wanted to frame my testimony in that way first. We don't have a lot here to offer in terms of changes to the bill, but there are a couple ways that I think we could draw a line of distinction that would help ensure that we don't cross that line with USDA and intervening federal requirements at the same time. And so we just have a couple of them, and they're short, that I could offer as recommendations if allowed.
Go ahead, please.
So the first one is on page 3, line 21. And after required by law, I would suggest inserting a statement that says, homemade or uninspected food shall not be served or utilized as an ingredient in a commercial food establishment. And what we're talking about there is taking uninspected items such as dairy and mixing it with an inspected item like meat, say a sausage gravy, that would then
Let's slow
compel
down just
us.
a minute, because we can't write as fast as you can talk.
And I
So-
have this in writing too.
You have it in writing for us. Could you pass that out to us so that we know what you're talking about? That would
Absolutely. I
be
apologize,
great.
Madam
That's
Chairman. I
all
forgot to,
right.
I forgot to
Oh,
do that.
That's okay. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much. And you have one for our secretary, please? Oh, all right.
But I will slow down nonetheless. So again, we're,
That's fine. Thank you very much.
thank you, Madam Chairman. So what this does is it makes sure that we don't take an uninspected item like raw milk in this case, and we mix it with something like, or make a sausage gravy. And so we're using raw milk as an ingredient. At that point, that would compel us as the Department of Ag to consider that meat adulterated, and it
Okay.
wouldn't be allowed for sale under federal regulations. So that's the rationale behind that statement. And if we are ready to move on, we only have
Yes.
one more suggestion.
Go ahead, yes. Well, now that we're not writing you, speed is not a problem, but we were trying diligently to take copious notes.
On page 5, line 2, we would suggest removing eggs from the requirement for adding additional labels. So what this section of the statute does is it says that these items have to be labeled as homemade, that they're, uninspected and unregulated. But for eggs, we don't think that that's appropriate because eggs already have an existing federal standard for labeling
Okay,
and don't want anybody to conflict with those two standards. So just for ease of use, we would recommend just removing that labeling requirement for eggs
right.
and allow people to follow through with other requirements that eggs have for labeling. And that's
Okay.
the extent of our testimony, unless there's any questions, which we're happy to answer.
All right, committee, are there any questions for the department? Questions for the department? Seeing none, stick around, we might have some later,
Sure.
but thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. And now we'll go to the public. And the first one up is the Farm Bureau. All right. Go right ahead.
Chairman Steinmetz Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Long history of supporting food freedom. Part of the food freedom movement, just to give a tiny little bit of background, this was developed because this is what the consumer wants. It's gotten to be a hotter topic, knowing where their food comes from, being able to buy local. Those are two emerging markets that are getting larger and larger. So to support this bill is quite easy for me and my organization. This is what the consumer wants. This is what producers want. It's pretty easy. And listening to the proposed amendments coming from the Department of Ag, absolutely no problem with them. I would support those as well. I do, every time I talk on food freedom, I do always point out that the producer of the food still has liability. That has never been diminished. If something should happen, heaven forbid, they're liable for this. But I think, almost without exception, probably without exception, the care taken by these local producers is astronomically great. They want to give a wholesome product. They want to sell a wholesome product. They don't want to cause any problems. And as Mr. Lindholm said, we haven't had a problem. So getting off my soapbox, sitting in favor of this bill, I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Thank you, Mr. Molini. Any questions for the Farm Bureau? Seeing none,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Next person up for public comment. Anyone else in the room like to, okay, come on up. All right, just welcome to the Ag Committee. Please state your name and the organization you're with.
My name is Mara McManaman, and I'm not with any organization.
Okay,
Mark Booty, now with the organization, just a citizen.
okay, we'll go right ahead.
Okay. Good evening, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. I am Mara McManaman, fourth generation Wyomingite from Goshen County in Torrington, Wyoming. I am in support of this bill 100%. I support our agricultural community. I firmly believe that we, the people of Wyoming, should maintain as much freedom as possible. I would advocate for less bureaucracy and more for the people's choice. Thank you, and I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. McManaman. Any questions? Questions from the committee? Seeing none, you're off the hook. All right, next, Mr. Moody.
Yes, Mark Booty again, Laramie County, support the bill, less bureaucracy. I know that I like buying local and that support our agricultural community rather than buying from the big box stores, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you for that. Any questions from the committee? Questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Yep. All right. Next up, and I should have asked you first, legislators in the room, co-sponsors. I'm still pretty new at this, so thank you for coming up and taking the lead. Go right ahead, introduce yourself and let us know what you have to say about the bill.
Okay, Chairman Steinmetz and committee, Pepper Ottman, House District 34 representative, and with me is Sarah Penn, House District 33. And so we've been able to be involved with the nexus of this. This has been so successful, and that's why we're here. Everybody in our county, from Lander to Riverton to wherever, has gotten very involved with the farmers markets. And it's been so successful that they were producing. We've had wonderful, wonderful gardens and different people having greenhouses and things. So they have upped their production, and they needed to do it more than 3 hours on a Wednesday or a Saturday or something. So they developed a store. And so then that's why we had the designated person. I will say it's very successful. Everybody's very serious about it. The subject of let the producer letting the consumer know, our consumers almost all know all of the producers because it's a community thing. So that's going very well. I had the opportunity to speak with Director Miyamoto and Justin also during this time, and it was very, very well taken. And I appreciate Senator Salazar bringing this bill and Mr. Lindholm being here, because you can see how everybody likes the idea and how it works, and everybody's working to make it better. So thank you. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Questions from the committee? Thank you. What a great success story. That's wonderful. Representative Penn, welcome.
Got to be patient. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, committee, for the opportunity to speak. I don't have a lot more to add than what has been added. I would ditto what the good representative here has said. I came up mostly because I actually have the ability to answer Senator Kolb's question from before on how brucellosis is treated.
Please do. That would
Being
be
a nurse
great.
practitioner,
Yeah.
brucellosis is pretty rare. I myself have never actually treated it, but it is treated with antibiotics, a course of doxycycline and streptomycin for about 45 days.
All right, there you go. You got your answer. Thank you for that. We've all learned a lot today. All right. Any questions, committee? All right, seeing none, you got one answered anyway. So,
Google it, Dr. Bone.
all right, thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
All right, any further public comment in the room on the Food Freedom Act? Seeing none in the room, we will go to the Zoom calls. Our first person signed up is Penny Vance from the Powder River Basin Resource Council. Would she be online? Okay. Penny, can you hear us? Oh, it'll take a few seconds. All right. Penny, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Well, you are on. Welcome to the Ag Committee. You are here to testify on Senate File 102, so we're listening intently.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Steinmetz, I'm sorry, and members of the committee. I appreciate you giving me this chance to talk. I'm going to keep this very short. It's a long day. We really support this bill. I am a agriculture and local foods organizer for the Powder River Basin Resource Council. We have many local foods members in our organization, and they're very excited about this bill. Really appreciate all the work that's been done to bring it forth. It really is very helpful in many ways. We have, reached out to the Institute for Justice to make sure that we clarify that we're not bumping up against federal law. They agree with everything that's been said. No, we aren't. It's really the state that's going to decide whether this milk products are legal or not with the Food Freedom Act. And so that's encouraging. The designated agent is a huge help, the clarifying that, both the producers and vendors, but also the inspectors. They need to that kind of clarity as well. So I really don't have a great deal more to say, except that we really are very supportive and pleased about this bill and hope that it passes. And thank you for letting us speak out.
Thank you very much. Any questions, committee, for Mrs. Vance? Seeing none, thank you for being with us tonight. All right, we'll go to our next testimony on Zoom. We have Teresa Adele from Mama's Homemade Ice Cream. Would Teresa be on the Zoom? All right, we will wait for just a moment. All right, Teresa, can you hear us? All right, we can see you. We can't hear you. All right. Well,
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Welcome to the Ag Committee. Go ahead,
Thank you.
please proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, committee. My name is Teresa Adele. I'm born and raised in Wyoming. I've lived here all my life. I only left to attend college and get a 4-year degree. And then I came home. From home, I run a homemade ice cream business called Mamia's Homemade Ice Cream. My 3-year-old son calls me Mamia, so that's how I named it. We live near a park with an ice cream shack in town, and I really wanted my boys to be able to have this summer treat. But the ice cream in our town is overprocessed. As tasty as it is, it's junk food. Actually, there was nowhere in town to buy ice cream that was not junk food. So I decided to start a company and make ice cream. My ice cream has 4 ingredients: raw cream, raw milk, maple syrup, and vanilla. Also from home, I am a professional mommy to 2 boys, ages 1 and 3. I say professional mommy because I have been pregnant and or breastfeeding for 4 years. This is truly God's miracle. My body has sustained another human being life for 4 years. Of course, that's 2 boys, but my 3-year-old is not still nursing, but heaven's gift to humanity is raw milk. It's mysteriously miraculous. If you let your raw cream sit on the counter for a couple days, voila, you have sour cream. Who knew? If you take that cream and put it through some cheesecloth, you have cream cheese. If you put it into the blender, you split it into butter and buttermilk. It's miraculous. It's simple. It's unprocessed. Now, if you try doing that with your pasteurized milk, you are going to have something nasty and rancid. Don't try that at home. Raw milk is a prerequisite for a healthy human. So also going on right now, currently, there is a gang of billionaire technocrats. You might know some of them, but they are trying to monopolize our farmland and trying to play God by investing in a product called biomilk, milk with a Q, biomilk. So how is this made? With mammary epithelial cells, that's right, breast tissue, which is then fed a bunch of cheap sugars derived from genetically engineered corn and soy, as well as E. coli, and then it's given antibiotics, so there's no other bacteria that can grow. So this E. coli becomes antibiotic resistant, and then it's served as milk. So this biomilk is ultra processed, it's junk food, and it's toxic. Listen, the byproduct of traditional ferments is usually edible, but the byproduct of this stuff is not even fit to go in the landfill. It's bio waste. For this group that heralds to save the planet from environmental dangers, they're going to miss the mark. It's true, some of America's farming practices are too industrial and too inhumane, and they need to change. But in Wyoming, we're doing a good job. We care about our land and we care about our animals. And we need to hold up our torch and show the rest of the states what God's farming and God's food looks like. Last year, a nutrition company, Abbott, had a huge recall on their Similac baby formula. Millions of mothers all over the world.
Excuse me, Miss Adele, can you hear me? Yes, we like to keep our testimony. We really appreciate you being here to testify, but we like to keep it strictly on the bill, and we're straying off into a lot of other topics right now. So if you could keep it on the bill, we would certainly appreciate it because we have a long night ahead of us. So
Okay,
yeah,
I
thank
will wrap it up. So anyways, formula processed formula for babies is not a good option, but raw milk is closest to human milk. And so we have a choice here tonight with this bill. Do you want to feed your babies, your newborn babies, biomilk or raw milk? We are in the process of defining food for the future generations, and it is being redefined for us whether we want it to be or not. There are people that are trying to redefine what real food is, and I believe this bill, passing this bill, will help us put real food, real milk in front of people and get people educated that for thousands of years before refrigeration, people thrived on simple raw milk. We don't need biomilk. So that's my question. And also this biomilk is going to be launched in ice cream. So for me, that's where it relates. Do you want to have biomilk? Ben & Jerry's is going to be the first to launch it, or do you want Mamiya's homemade ice cream? In 3 to 5 years, it should be launched. So anyways, the future definition of food is in our hands. Let's lead the way and pass this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Any questions? Questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll let you get back to your family tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have anyone else queued up on Zoom yet, Pierre? Christine Hampshire. Christine, can you hear us yet? Christine, are you able to hear us?
Oh, sorry. Okay, now I think I've pushed all the right buttons. I'm sorry for that delay.
Christine, hi, how are you tonight?
Hi. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Steinmetz and members of the Ag Committee. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak. And I again want to thank Senator Salazar for all the time and effort that he's put into SF 102 and for allowing us this opportunity to further discuss our food freedoms in Wyoming. So as you mentioned, my name is Christine Hampshire. I'm the owner at Crossy Dairy, and as I like to tell my customers, they're milkmaid. And I've been involved in the production and sales of raw milk since even before the Food Freedom Act originated in 2015. I actually took a second this afternoon to quickly estimate that I've probably sold easily over 13,000 gallons of raw milk while I've been with my Crossy Dairy business. So while I'm still involved in an agricultural pursuit, and we well know that I'm not getting rich, my family has no doubt enjoyed blessings from this ability to sell raw milk, especially as we are purely an agricultural income-based family. The raw milk has definitely offset like volatile changes in our annual beef calf check. So we really appreciate this. In August of 2020, my family opened the Food Freedom Market, or the Freedom Foods Market, I'm sorry, in Sheridan, Wyoming. We opened this after I'd been an attendee at local farmers markets for several years, and we opened our Freedom Foods Market in Sheridan as a way to further increase our opportunity to sell raw milk, but also to further increase the ability for other local producers to sell their products. And so while I do greatly appreciate this discussion and this opportunity for the expansion of raw milk sales, I also am still concerned about sales opportunities for other local producers, in particularly those that produce potentially hazardous foods. In November of 2022, the Freedom Foods Market, as well as other markets around the state, received several visits from CHS inspectors. These visits were often challenging just because there is a struggle with interpretations within the Food Freedom Act. This seems to be just a common theme, not just among a struggle of interpretations between producers and CHS, but we even experience some struggles of interpretations among CHS inspectors and the Department of Ag. And so it is just a struggle, and we as local producers want to have a clear understanding and follow the act and execute our jobs correctly. So several local producers, including myself and members from other organizations, including the Wyoming Food Coalition, have worked on suggestions that we feel could better enhance the sales of not just raw milk, but of all potentially hazardous foods. Because like I mentioned, I own the Freedom Foods Market, and we have other foods that are of concern when we start to discuss potentially hazardous foods. And so we don't want the entire group to be missed as we work forward with these clarifications. So these suggestions that we've worked on, Chairman Steinmetz, I believe you were emailed a copy of these suggestions. I think that they make changes just in two simple ways and would provide a lot of clarification and less struggle for interpretation, as well as expansion for all potentially hazardous foods. So I just ask that those suggestions would be read further and brought into this discussion as SF 102 moves forward. These two simple suggestions would make improvements by redefining designated agent. That redefinition would add in a consignment model market or a food freedom store that could be designated by the producer. And then the second change would then take that redefined designated agent and insert it into the ability for potentially hazardous foods to use that agent for sales and such, as you discussed earlier. I believe that these two simple suggestions also take into consideration some issues that are addressed in the Food Freedom Act, such as food safety when dealing with potentially hazardous foods and an informed end consumer. What we've experienced in the last 2 years in our Food Freedom Market in Sheridan is that we very well address the potentially hazardous foods and their time and temperature control. And we do that by the product going straight into a fridge or a freezer, where I know that when I was at a farmer's market and had to carry all my milk there, you know, I would put all that milk into a cooler and it would sit there for several hours on a 90-degree day. So I think our Food Freedom Market is a better model of obtaining food safety and marketing those foods. I also think it accomplishes the informed end consumer, because every week in our market, we have wonderful conversations still with our end consumers where we educate them about our foods. Those foods obviously are different than a retail space food often. And so we have wonderful conversations. So I think that we're still achieving those two main goals. And so by redefining that designated agent and just allowing like a consignment model food freedom store, we're still keeping those foods a little bit less or a little bit more limited. We're not addressing retail spaces, but we're still expanding the sale of potentially hazardous food. So I just hope that maybe while I support this wonderful bill and thank everybody that's been involved, I hope that maybe you would also read those suggestions that local producers and the Wyoming Food Coalition worked on. And another thought maybe to go with Senator Cole's question is that in the state of Wyoming, we bangs vaccinate, and that is to prevent brucellosis. Just this morning on my family's ranch, we spent the morning with our veterinarian bangs vaccinating all of our beef heifers as well as my dairy heifers. And so that's one preventative measure that goes into that. So thank you all so much again for your time and attention to this. Food Freedom has made a big difference for my family and for all of the local producers that I work with. We have 40 local producers involved at the Food Freedom store in Sheridan. And so I thank you all for your time and attention to this.
Thank you, Ms. Hampshire, for your testimony. And unfortunately, I have not seen in my inbox the amendment that you're speaking of. So we do not have that in front of us to review. I would suggest that you work with the sponsor of the bill if you have suggestions or amendments, and then you can decide whether that would fit within this very defined title of the bill. The title, any amendment would have to fit within the title of the bill, and this is very specific. And so I'm not sure if what you're proposing would fit in that title, and so I'm hesitant to entertain it today, but we appreciate your testimony, and I'm sure that Representative or Senator Salazar, he's moved to the Senate now, would be glad to visit with you. Thank you for your time tonight. Any questions, committee? Questions? Seeing none. We have, it looks like maybe 2 more people on Zoom tonight. All right, we will admit Adam Bunker. Adam, are you able to hear us?
Yes, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Go ahead and introduce yourself and give us your testimony on Senate File 102. Please let us know
Wonderful.
for or against the bill. And if you could keep it slightly concise, we're running late into the night here.
Absolutely, Madam Chairman. Good evening to Madam Chair and members of the Agriculture Committee. I am Adam Bunker, and I am here as the president of the Wyoming Food Coalition. We are a statewide nonprofit working to address food system challenges throughout Wyoming, with a major emphasis on local food production and sales. I want to say first thank you to Senator Salazar and Madam Chairman Steinmetz for your efforts on SF 102. I will say, besides the coalition, my day job is as part of a family-owned and operated farm in Sheridan. We sell a number of products under the Food Freedom Act, so I know firsthand the impacts of this legislation on our livelihoods. Our coalition stands in support of this legislation and any legislation to expand locally produced food sales through the Wyoming Food Freedom Act. You've heard some of the concerns from other producers on the challenges with interpretation of this act. So instead, what I wanted to cover briefly, I appreciate how late it is the economic benefits associated with support and expansion of this act. A couple of quick numbers. In 2018, Wyoming households spent $1.8 billion on groceries for at-home consumption. That was before COVID and more at-home eating. That was before supply chain issues left parts of grocery shelves empty. That was before spikes in inflation. Now, the majority of that money simply left our communities in the state overall. As you likely know, a common piece of business wisdom is that it's easier to keep the dollar that you have than to earn a new one. So when it comes to food costs, can we really do that in Wyoming? Well, I'm here to say an emphatic yes. Here are numbers from a couple of the local food stores that are up and running, even with challenges, and they're partnered with producers under consignment models. They are selling on the order of $250,000 to $300,000 worth of products in a year. Again, that's their products, but that is partnered with businesses like mine. I don't have a store. I am selling it through someone else on a consignment basis and out of my farm. That number is coming out of stores smaller than the first house I rented. Now, according to the Wyoming Economic Analysis Division, money spent locally turns over in its community an average of 4 to 7 times. So instead of that money leaving the state or the specific community, in fact, it generates an additional $1.25 million in economic activity, much of which goes to turn on to things that are taxable in sales tax revenue. So please keep that in mind with some of the challenges that have been mentioned with interpretation and enforcement of the laws. How much bigger could that number be if things were expanded, or how much smaller could it be if we continue to have challenges with interpretation and enforcement? So building on that figure. Most producers also sell their products outside of those stores. So I would estimate in my home county of Sheridan that our local foods market is actually closer to $1 million a year, again, generating 4 times that in economic activity. So when we look at whether we can realistically capture a worthwhile portion of that $1.8 billion and keep that money in our state, the answer is yes. So I will close by asking for your support of this act and any future opportunities to expand sales of local foods through the Wyoming Food Freedom Act. Thank you, and I would be happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bunker. Any questions for Mr. Bunker? Seeing none, thank you for being here tonight with us and supporting this act. Next, we have Emily, and I can't say the last name. She is the next bill. Okay. All right. So that concludes Zoom and public testimony. We are closing public testimony now. And so we're going back to the committee. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill?
Move the bill.
Moved by Kolb, seconded by Ide. Are there any amendments to the bill? Amendments to the bill?
Madam
Senator
Chairman,
Hicks.
page 2. Line 7. After producer, strike the word to facilitate sales transactions. And including. So you will strike to facilitate sales transactions including.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, and then we will insert in that line for the purpose of sales. So now that's going to read, designated agent means a person employed by the producer for the purpose of sales, marketing, transport, storage, and delivery of food and drink products.
All right, Linda, did you catch that? All right.
And Madam Chairman, so then you have to bring that down also. When you get to line 23 at the bottom of that, after agent, you strike to. Turn over to page 3 and strike the words facilitate a transaction. And then we will go back and insert the same language. So after agent, on page 23, so the very last, we're going to start at agent. It will now read, for the purposes of sales, marketing, transport, storage, and delivery of food or drink for products.
All right. Did you get that, Linda?
Madam Chairman, if I could just clarify, is the word for the purpose or the purposes?
Purposes.
Purposes.
It would be plural.
Thank you.
All right. All right, committee, is there a second on that amendment?
Second.
seconded by Kolb, moved by Hicks. Any discussion on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The amendment has been adopted. Further amendments to the bill. Further amendments to the bill. Any amendments on page 3?
Madam Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
page 3, line 21. After the word law, start with a new sentence. It says homemade or uninspected food shall not be served or utilized as an ingredient in a commercial food establishment. So this is the amendment that was presented by Director Miyamoto.
Senator Hicks, do we have a second on that?
Second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. I'm just going to bring up Senator Salazar as we're working this and just see. I apologize, I didn't bring you up sooner. Would you like to weigh in on any of these amendments so far?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I understand these amendments, these strengthen the bill and clarify it more. And would you have any thoughts on that?
If I could, Madam Chairman.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, what this amendment from the Department of Ag is attempting to do is actually a good thing. The big thing, and I'm going to oversimplify it because I'm a simple guy, it's a lot like Ghostbusters. You don't want to cross streams. You got inspected and you got uninspected. If you cross those streams, that's when the USDA gets ornery. So this ensures for the USDA's edification when they read through this law, because rest assured, they will read through this law. They do tend to keep a pretty close eye on Wyoming due to all of you, Madam Chairman. So that's what this is doing, and it will lay out for the USDA that there is no crossing of those inspected versus non-inspected going in the same product.
All right, so with that being said, is there any discussion on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The amendment has been adopted. We're on to the next amendment. Would anyone like to move the next amendment from the Department of Ag?
I'll move that we add the language and delete the part of that language from on page 5, line 2. So comma after food on line 2, and then strike eggs, and then add and dairy products.
All right.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Ide, seconded by Hicks. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The amendment has been adopted. Are there any further amendments on the bill? Any further amendments? Question on the bill. Would you please call the roll? Do roll call on the bill, Linda? If you're ready. Did you get all those amendments? Did we go too fast? All right, thank you so much.
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
Aye.
Senator Ide,
Aye.
Senator Kolb,
I say aye.
and Chairman Steinmetz.
Aye.
It's 5 ayes, ma'am.
All right. The
Madam
bill has
Chair.
passed.
If I may, I just want to compliment you, Madam Chair. You've been also leading in this regard, and I want to thank you and the committee. Appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you. So Senator Salazar, you also have the next bill up. I'm wondering if you have anyone that's traveled for this bill, or if we could hold it over to our next meeting. Is there anyone in the room that is here on Senate file
I was just going to mention, Madam Chair, that perhaps you.
124, foreign ownership of agricultural land? Yes.
Of this bill to the,
Linda, we will let the sponsors of the bills present them on the floor. And so I need to mention that with Senator Cooper's bill as well. We'll let him present those bills on the Senate floor. So
Madam Chair, I
Yes.
would be more than happy if you wanted to hold this over. It's,
would you?
so,
Okay.
yes.
If we have someone online, we could let them testify now if they're unable to join us on Tuesday. Could we check in with them here and see? I think we'll just hold this bill over until Tuesday, and since they're there on Zoom, maybe they can tune in on Zoom on Tuesday. Thank you, Senator Salazar. All right, so with that, we'll hold over Senate File 124 until Tuesday. And we'll probably have some other bills by then. Thank you all for being here at the Ag Committee, and we will be adjourned for tonight.